So if this book is based on Alice in Wonderland, does that make Grudge the Cheshire Cat? Or because she's a queen, does that mean she's the Queen of Hearts? Hello interwebs and welcome to my review of the latest Star Trek release, this time a book release called Star Trek Discovery Wonderlands by Una McCormack. I have got to say I've been very excited for this book, not only for the plot of the book, which basically takes place in that year-long gap that we had within Star Trek Discovery Season 3, where Michael Burnham was sort of separated from Discovery in that year before the USS Discovery finally landed into the 31st century. But the other reason that I was very excited for this book is it was being written by perhaps my favorite Star Trek novel author, Una McCormack. And I don't just say that flippantly. As many of you know, I am a huge aficionado of Star Trek novels. I read every single one that comes out. I've read numerous throughout my lifetime. I own over 400 Star Trek novels in the other room. I have literally 2 bookshelves dedicated to it. So for me to say that one of the authors that is part of the Star Trek novelverse is one of my favorite authors, that's a sentence that I said. I'm not just saying that as like, oh yeah, I've read 1 or 2 of her books. Like, no, Una McCormack is easily one of my favorite Star Trek authors, and I was so excited to dive into her take on this sort of very important missing piece of the Star Trek Discovery mythos. And so with all that being said, I'm going to get into the book proper with a spoiler-free discussion up front. I'll get a little into some spoilers as we go, but I also have a surprise announcement at the end of this video, so stay tuned for the end of the video. Something pertaining to this book. But before I get to my giant tease, because I know I'm a tease, let's actually focus on what this book is and says and does, and the whole review thing. The thing where I review the thing that you clicked on the video for. I take a while to get to my point. Thank you, everybody, for sticking with me. But spoiler-free, this book is honestly a really exciting read and kind of a different take for a Star Trek novel. Most Star Trek novels kind of follow one major story beat and follow that all the way through. It's like sort of one plot that we get. This book kind of takes a little bit of a different tact in that it kind of feels like a missing season of Star Trek Discovery where we were following Michael Burnham. Like I said before, this follows that missing gap year that we had on Star Trek Discovery where Michael Burnham was on her own, and we're following her for basically the entirety of this book, just focusing on her journey and what it was like to appear in this future that is so dramatically different from the world that she knew, without the Federation there, without Discovery there, her having no anchors to her previous life, to her previous identity. All that stuff is here, and we sort of get this Burnham out of time, both literally and metaphysically. This Burnham feeling like she doesn't have a place within this new world, and her trying to reach and discover a new identity. And the book basically follows Burnham's arc throughout this entire book to where we see her in episode, I think, 3 of Star Trek Discovery, where she's sort of kind of lost a little bit of her way. She doesn't feel as tied to Starfleet, which is kind of surprising given how much she espoused Starfleet values way back throughout all of Star Trek Discovery, especially in Season 2. And this kind of gets into that in a really wonderful way. I really love seeing how much Michael Burnham is trying to grasp at trying to find Starfleet, trying to find the Federation, trying to do whatever she can to find this thing that meant so much to her, and her kind of feeling the loss of people not really believing in the Federation anymore, and sort of having sort of understandable reasons why they would feel that way. I don't want to get too much into spoilers of the book just yet, but I have to say the exploration of why the Federation fell so quickly after the burn, and the sort of explorations around that and what that means to Burnham and what she starts to understand about that, honestly was done incredibly well throughout the entirety of the book. That I really appreciated that. There wasn't just like, oh, the burn happened and the Federation just fell the next day. Yes, obviously that was a big inciting moment, but there were things that were happening before that Michael Burnham starts to discover that I think kind of were understandable and really kind of relates to her feelings about the Federation. But I really love that she never loses sight of her veneration and love for this organization that meant so much to her, and for all of us Trekkies is like the utopian ideal. Like the story never says like the Federation wasn't this utopian ideal, but that was like kind of surprising to many people living in this time. Like there are many times like Book, the character from Season 3 appears throughout this novel, is sort of like, you lived in a moneyless society, you lived in a society that like espoused all these values. That's insanely ridiculous. I don't believe it. And sort of that like utopian ideal that Burnham got to live in is now something kind of in myth and legend. Kind of in a weird way, what we feel like the Federation is today. Like, we sort of look at the Federation as this fictional concept, this utopia that we want to dream for, yearn for. And for Book and other characters, it's kind of the same thing, this sort of like mystical thing that never really will have happened. But for Burnham, it's very real. And so I loved that exploration with her character, and I thought it was very done well here. I have to say, this sort of fall of the Federation, both before and after the burn, and how it ties into things like the temporal wars, was actually delivered in a really cool way through holographic logs by Sahil's grandmother. Yes, Sahil, the sort of caregiver and carekeeper of the Federation outpost that we saw at the end of Star Trek Discovery Season 3, Episode 1, That Hope Is You, Part 1. Ugh, that's a sentence. But it was a really cool delivery method for this, and such a creative way to sort of show us what life both before and after the burn was for the Federation, and sort of tie it back to the story going on with Michael. The other thing that I liked about this is that it feels very episodic. The story doesn't have like one big major plot line. There is a threat that does appear at the beginning of the novel and sort of gets hinted at throughout the novel, but doesn't really come to a head until the end of the book. Kind of similarly to how the Star Trek Discovery season kind of plays out. Like, you have hints of an idea throughout the book, and it's sort of seeded throughout the story in each episode, but the episodes themselves kind of focus on different little beats. And so there are like 3 or 4 different like mini stories within this book that are kind of separated from everything else, but they sort of give little dark mirrors to what Michael Burnham's going through and through the Federation. I don't want to spoil too many of them, but Michael Burnham encounters several different civilizations, several different situations that kind of mirror like what the Federation has morphed into in this timeline, kind of being maybe very isolationist and sort of segregationist in some ways. People who who want to believe in the Federation but don't necessarily know what that means just yet. People who maybe want to work together but don't necessarily espouse the values of the Federation. There's so many like different things where like, oh, Michael Burnham can find pieces of what she's lost here, but it's not fully this whole thing. And so she's trying to have this push and pull. And what I love is that each one of these situations is very interesting in its own right, and sort of its own little like episode. But again, mirrors what Michael Burnham's going through, where she's sort of looking for those things. And it ultimately raises this big important question for Burnham that is, oh, do I kind of accept where I am now and what this world is? Or do I try to push for more? Do I try to make the Federation happen again? And you sort of understand her arc to where she gets to at the sort of middle of Star Trek Discovery Season 3, and why she has that crisis of conscience and faith. And I think that's just, that arc is so wonderfully explored here. The other thing that I really loved about this too is building out the world of this era of the Federation. You know, in Star Trek Discovery Season 3, we got little bits and pieces, but it was sort of mainly the main planets. We saw where Vulcan is, where Earth is, where Trill is, the sort of main players that we know in the Star Trek universe. Whereas this book kind of takes a much lower level approach and sort of says, like, where are all the little pieces? Where are the, like, what is society like? What is culture like at this time? Like, one of the things that I found really fascinating was there are Starfleet reenactors, kind of like what we think of Civil War reenactors today. There are people that do Starfleet reenactors, and Michael Burnham says, like, oh, their uniforms aren't quite accurate, but they get, like, very excited about, like, Starfleet memorabilia when, like, they find plaques and things. And so I thought that was, like, a cool little way to sort of evoke the culture. We get to explore also more about the courier system, because we got hints of what the couriers were throughout Star Trek Discovery Season 3, but we didn't get like a full fleshing out of what that society is. So we get a lot of like their honor system and sort of like how couriers actually look out for each other. There's sort of like an honor among thieves is probably not the right word, but that same sort of idea there. The other thing too is we get much further deep dives into characters that didn't get as much exploration in Star Trek Discovery Season 3. The sort of main one is Sahil, the sort of wayward station owner that was sort of holding the flag for the Federation until Michael Burnham showed up. And I know a lot of people really reacted to him and how much they loved him, even in his small piece of discovery. And this book gives him a whole lot more characterization, a whole lot more to do. One of the things that I thought was weird in Discovery Season 3 is they kind of made it implied that all Sahil did was sort of like wait in that room. His entire life, he's just like wakes up, sits in the room, and then waits for someone to show up. But this book kind of dives a little bit deeper. It's like, no, he's actually an administrator of a spaceport. So he actually has stuff going on and stuff to do. He's not just sort of sitting in that room all day. He actually meets with and discusses other people. He's sort of organizing the sector. You get a much more fully fleshed out version of his life, but he sort of bounces off of Burnham in an interesting way, where he sort of has these sort of belief in the Federation, and his faith will never be shaken. So while Burnham's going through this crisis of faith, he is sort of this stalwart, like, no, the Federation will come. Believe. I believed for years that you would come, that someone like you would come, and you did. And if you have that faith, we can continue. So while Burnham's having this crisis of faith going on, he sort of is that stalwart pillar. But then on the other side, we have Book, who also appeared in Discovery Season 3, who is sort of pulling Burnham in the other way, saying like, no, you need to kind of go this way. You kind of need to understand that the Federation's gone, and I understand that you missed that, and understand that that's really hard for you, and I'm supportive of that, but you need to accept where you're at. You can't just like will this thing into existence. You can't just have these high-minded ideals anymore. You need to learn how to use money, for heaven's sakes. There's a wonderful little chapters in this bit where like Michael Burnham does not know how to use money or understand economics all that well, or like the ability to it. Also, there's a lot of like anti-capitalism stuff in here too that I really enjoyed. Like Burnham even has like a whole section where she talks about how like, oh, because this world values money now, she feels like she's working to work as opposed to working to enjoy herself, which is like kind of, radical idea. I mean, I made a whole video on it on my other channel. So great stuff there, and sort of that sort of like subtly sort of like even political messaging throughout all of this. And that's sort of the final piece of this that I really loved about this book is, and it's what I love about Una McCormack's writing just in general, is she does such a great job of making the political personal and the personal political, really drawing those lines. It's sort of a theme that I see throughout almost all of her books and works within the Star Trek universe, is she's so great about taking these grand scale themes, grand scale ideas, and making them felt on a personal level and mirroring it into a character's arc, but then taking that character's arc and extrapolating back out into how it affects the political stuff going on. And I think that's when Star Trek really works best, when it makes the personal political and the political personal, where it takes character interactions and extrapolates them out into bigger ideas. And I think that Una McCormack does that super, super well here. But since that gets into spoilers, I'm going to wrap out the video here with my official really cool announcement that I have coming up. And that is the fact that I am going to be interviewing Una McCormack, the author of this very book and several other amazing Star Trek novels, over on my main channel next week. I'm so excited to do this. It's going to be an hour-long interview. It's going to be going up on my main channel next Friday. So I'm honestly so pumped to talk to her. She is one of my favorite authors, like I said. And so please go, if you're not subscribed to my main channel, which I assume most of you are, but if you're not, please go subscribe to my main channel, because I will be interviewing her next week, and I'm very excited to talk to her about this novel as well as her entire career and a lot of her work within Star Trek fiction, as well as some other cool little tidbits that I really am excited to talk to her about, because she is, just to give you a little tease of that, she's one of the authors that made Garrick officially LGBTQ within the novel, so we're definitely going to be talking about that. But to finalize my thoughts on this book, I think Star Trek Discovery Wonderlands is an absolutely fantastic book. It does such a great job taking these sort of episodic sort of stories that are like dark mirrors of the Federation, and sort of echoing that through Burnham's arc, and as she sort of goes through this push and pull of, does she accept her situation? Does she keep trying to hold out a flame for the Federation? Who is she in this universe and in this new sort of time period? And wonderfully mirrors that with not only the situations, but with characters like Book and Sahil on either side, and also fleshing out the world and time period of this era of Star Trek Discovery on a much smaller scale than we got to see in the Discovery Season 3 proper, and also giving characterizations to those aforementioned characters like Sahil and Book, who, Book we got a lot more in Discovery Season 3, but Sahil we got almost nothing in Discovery Season 3, so it was really nice to see him get a lot more fleshed out here. I think my only negative that I have about the book is that the final big climax, the sort of overarching story that appears in bits and pieces throughout the book, is really cool and interesting, but kind of gets a little bit of an anticlimactic ending. The ending of this book involving a Cardassian character, because Una McCormack loves her Cardassian characters, because of course, and I won't spoil exactly how, but the Cardassian character is really cool, but the ending of this book kind of, for me, felt a little bit like, oh, okay, I guess that's just dealt with now. It kind of felt a little bit easy at the end, but I don't think that takes away from the rest of the book, because the rest of the book is so much more focused on Burnham as a character and is much more episodic. So if this was a much more plot-focused book, I would probably say that I was a bit more disappointed by that. But here, I don't think it's ultimately a bad thing. I don't think it's a bad ending. I just think it's a little bit anticlimactic in terms of like they set up this sort of big fight, this big thing that happens at the end, and kind of gets subverted in a way that I found a little bit kind of annoying, because it seemed to happen off-screen. as opposed to in the actual story proper itself. And I would have rather, like, I don't mind subverting a big action sequence in a book, especially in a book, but for it to happen kind of off to the side of the main plot was a bit disappointing to me. But overall, I think this is a fantastic book, a great exploration of Burnham, and if you're fascinated about what happened in that missing year of Star Trek Discovery, I cannot recommend it enough, and a great job by one of my favorite authors. So that's it for this review. Like I said, I have an interview going up next Friday, so not this coming Friday, but the Friday after that, with Una McCormack on my main channel. I'm so excited to talk to her about it. But until then, I want to hear all your thoughts about this novel, spoiler or spoiler-free. So if you have read it, let me know what you think. And if you haven't, let me know if you will after this. I'd love to hear all that down in the spoiler or in the comments below, not in the spoilers below. In the comments below, don't forget, like I said, I have my main channel where that interview will be going up. So subscribe over there. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel if I can speak words. And also have a Patreon page that you can help support me at. But beyond all of that, I hope that you, as always, live long and prosper.